So our next panel is going to be led by Deena Shakir, who's Business Development and Tech for Social Impact at Google. She leads business and partnership development for Google's Social Impact Network, focused on global development, civic innovation, and empowering women in technology. She was previously a Presidential Management Fellow in the Office of the Secretary of State, where she served as a Global Partnerships Advisor. As the agency's lead on diaspora engagement, she collaborated closely with government, private, and multilateral partners to help develop innovative solutions to some of the world's most pressing problems. Deena was a key architect in the launch, management, and development of the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance and the Secretary's Global Diaspora Forum. She was also responsible for liaising with the Silicon Valley tech community to apply lessons from design thinking and innovation to USG's development and diplomacy efforts. She previously worked with USAID, USAID's Global Development Alliance, the Aspen Institute, and the Global Philanthropy Forum. She also covered the White House for BBC News and was lead anchor for a bilingual news show on Al Arabiya. Trilingual in Arabic, French, and English, she has worked and studied in the UAE, Egypt, and France. She holds a joint BA in Social Studies and Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations from Harvard College and an MA in Arab Studies from the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. Of Iraqi origin, she's the youngest member to have served on the board of the Harvard Arab Alumni Association, where she led their effort to recruit students from the Arab world and launched their first public service fellowship. She also serves on the boards of the Abraham Path Initiative, the Harvard Alumni Association, Tekwadi, and the Arab Film Festival. Thank you for being here, Deena.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd love to get a sense for who's here in the audience. So if I could get a show of hands, some questions that are relevant to our panel today. How many of you consider yourselves a member of a diaspora community? Raise your hands. How many of you consider yourselves members of the tech community or use technology in your daily jobs? How many of you consider yourselves entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs? It's a real world. My husband laughs when I use the word entrepreneur, but it's a real word. Great. Well, allow me to introduce our panelists, and then we would love to have an informal discussion today and really spend the majority of our time opening it up for questions from the audience. To my very right is Babur Ozden, who's the founding CEO of Maana Big Data search engine. Backed by Intel Capital, GE Ventures, and Frost Venture Partners, Maana Search is a new discovery experience on big data on Hadoop. Babur has previously served as president of DataCert, the largest legal e-billing provider in the world, which was consequently acquired by Wolters Kluwer. And he's the founding CEO of Super Online, the largest internet service provider in Turkey, which was acquired by Turkcell. He's also founded Turkish Spark of Silicon Valley, an organization to help immigrant engineers to become American entrepreneurs. He holds an undergraduate degree in computer science from UT Austin and an MBA from Rice University. Another graduate from UT Austin is Dilawar Syed. I first met Dilawar actually when I was working at the State Department. As Ali mentioned, I helped lead the State Department's efforts to engage diaspora communities in the development and diplomacy efforts of their countries of origin. And Dilawar has been a very active member on the President's Commission for the White House Commission for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, when he was appointed in 2010. He's currently the president and CEO of Yonja Media Group. Prior to that, he was at Yahoo, where he led their strategy and business operations for platform and infrastructure. And he's been very involved in the nonprofit space, including at the White House. He also has an MBA from Wharton. All the panelists, except for Austin's bios, are in the book, which is why I read the full one, so I'll allow you to read those. To my left is Mustafa, I'm going to pronounce this properly, Kilicaslan. Okay, great. Mustafa just left Microsoft about 2 months ago after almost 20 years. He most recently served as Director of Public-Private Alliances at Microsoft, based in Istanbul, where he led their efforts for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa to inspire and incentivize governments to help solve policy problems by making tech more relevant and fostering innovation and entrepreneurship. He himself is a former entrepreneur. He started Turkey's first health and beauty company and has been very involved in the nonprofit and civic world himself. So without further ado, I'm going to pose some questions to these panelists, and I'd love for you to start brewing up your own questions, which we'll spend the latter half of the conversation discussing. Let me start with Dilawar. Dilawar, the large part of your career prior to becoming an entrepreneur was focused on strategy and operations and as a consultant prior to that. How do you feel that your experience helped you or didn't help you to become an entrepreneur?
Well, there are two parts to that question. First of all, thanks for having me here. And I just wanted to say very quickly that this event and the idea of Berkeley hosting this with the program is terrific. We should not forget the fact that these things go a long way. Obviously, there are more people in the room for sure, but it's a great effort, and we should all hopefully walk away with the idea of how we continue to build upon this. So it's terrific content, and congratulations to everybody who's been involved with, and also TechWadi. In terms of how did my experience at Siebel or SAP or in consulting or Yahoo prepared me for this role in emerging markets? The simple answer is in two ways. One, it did not, which is emerging markets is very dynamic. It's a different world. It is not something we think about on a daily basis when we are launching a new product at Yahoo. You may not hear this from Yahoo, but that's exactly what happens. Having said that, when it comes to the operating experience, building things, building products, best class user experience, or building things that can scale, that experience is relevant. In fact, that's we will talk about this a bit more, but that is the biggest giving factor between this part of the world and a part of the world that we've all been talking about, and that is talent. People who have experience, who actually have built businesses, run things at scale, manage them, sustain them, know how to manage teams, and especially in our industry, which is internet. That's obviously extremely relevant, I would say, as a huge asset to a country like Turkey, where I operate. But in terms of preparing me to go in Istanbul. And I'm not Turkish, by the way. I grew up in Pakistan. I made a little Turkish, but I had to learn a lot about Turkey. Doing all that, building relationships, figuring out the culture, which is fairly complex and very rich, was all I had to do myself. And if anything that helped me there, quite frankly, was just my Pakistani hat. I could appreciate a lot of things, a lot of nuances, given my own heritage. And finally, I would say this, and at the end of the day, we do these things, especially in my case. I left my career at Yahoo when I went and worked in Turkey. I could have gone, other places in the valley. But it was really the passion, or for me, wanting to operate in the region. I felt strongly that, we as members of the diaspora are very lucky, very, very fortunate to be where we are. And we got to give, if you will, back and engage in the region more so. So when I went to Istanbul in 2009, quite frankly, things were starting to take off, especially in our space. And but I told Tiger, who's an investor, that look, this region there's a lot going on here, and I think there's a lot of promise here in our industry. But at the end of the day, it was that passion to engage with the talent in the region, with the entrepreneur community in the region, that really drove me, through thick and thin, and often through a very difficult time when you're operating in a brand new market. And you're also dealing with a business that is going through transition, and you're brought in to figure out its next life and to take it from point A to point B. So yes, experience was definitely helpful, but in terms of just the day-to-day, knowing how to operate in a market like Turkey, it was other factors from my background and just my personal passion for helping the region that was more instrumental.
Great. This next question is for all three panelists, and if we could just do 1 to 2 minutes for each of you. All of you have had some level of experience in the exchange between Turkey and Silicon Valley. Some of you started your career here and have then gone on to start a venture in Turkey. Others started your career in Turkey and have consequently either come to Silicon Valley or to Seattle. And I'm curious to hear how the experiences have differed and how the entrepreneurial energy is different, if at all, and in particular how that has changed over time. Maybe starting with Babur.
Well, of course, in my comparison, there's zero resemblance between Silicon Valley and anywhere on the planet. But that's not in the bad sense. Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley, and the entrepreneurs in other parts of the world have to figure out some fundamental things themselves, being thousands of miles away from Silicon Valley. When it comes to its core, really, whether you're in Silicon Valley or somewhere else, there's some fundamental things as an entrepreneur you have to do. Number one, you have to decide you don't want to be on somebody's payroll anymore. It's just a decision. You make a very simple decision that you want to be your own boss. You want to create a value. In any kind of business, you could open a bakery to do that. Second is you got to find a business partner or employees. These are not just problems of Silicon Valley. You work for Google, you know how tough to find great people. Same all over the planet. Third, when your business shows merit that it may have something big, you've got to find capital to grow it. So on these fundamental three issues, whether we're here or elsewhere, we have to solve these problems as entrepreneurs.
So in terms of differences between the Valley and Turkey, and I think I kind of alluded to some of that. Let me start with the assets first. And I don't want to wear, and this is one big lesson for me, is when you operate and you work on the ground, you don't think Valley out. You can and you should think the world out, right? So I'm speaking from a vantage point of Istanbul right now. I think one of the assets that Turkey offers, and we heard some of that this morning, it is this incredible sense of can do. It is going through a very interesting period, and in some ways where the Valley was probably 20, 30 years ago, right? Where people are just, there's this incredible amount of energy and enthusiasm to build things, and that's terrific. And you often see that being tapered somewhat in this part of the world for a lot of reasons that we know. Secondly, the assets in terms of also it's just growth. One thing that hits you, and many of you travel in the region, is how young the region is, and how noisy the place is. Like I often come through New York for my work with the White House. I break my journey in East Coast, and honestly, when I'm staying in Manhattan, I find Manhattan quieter than Istanbul, and it reflects. I mean, because the energy, the noise, the dynamism of the place, the growth, the all the good and the bad that comes with it, that is lend itself to creating consumer products that are frankly have to be built for a very challenging user base. So again, I will put that as an asset. And in many ways, that has helped us innovate, to be honest with you, sometimes at a faster pace than I would have if we were just looking at signals from the Valley. In fact, yesterday I was at a conference, and the Evernote CEO, I'm sure many of you use Evernote, Phil was talking about how they build products, and they said that they have taken a different model than Apple, and that is that they actually have product development folks now around the world building products along with their colleagues in the Valley. So they're not just building here and then quote unquote localizing for the markets, but rather they're building things in region. We do the exact same thing in our company. I have local Turkish engineers that I feel proud to have hired from college, groomed them, and they are building stuff that we are now starting to launch outside Turkey. So that asset, that sort of more of the open boundaries that these folks have, and just given where they are with their rate of growth, that's an asset which I find is somewhat tapering in our part of the world. In terms of where I find a big difference, and that's something where I have to spend a lot of time, it goes back to talent and it goes back to the culture. There is. I know we hear this a lot, but it is true that we celebrate failure in this place. Just in this 20 square mile, even outside that, it goes down. Turkey, and for that matter, Pakistan, where I originally come from, a lot of these places, a lot of young people have to prove themselves. It's very hard to go take a risk, even if you have resources, right? And say, look, I'm going to take this risk, and I'm going to fail 5 times before I, potentially could become a successful startup. That's a big challenge, and I think it will take generations, or maybe 1 or 2 generations before we can overcome that. It's not a dig against Turkey, it's just the way things are. I mean, emerging markets, developing world, people want to be at a P&G or a Coca-Cola or at a Microsoft, with all due respect to Mustafa's company, because it's flashy. They don't want to come to us because we work in a garage, and there's a promise, but the promise is not there until you really sweat. That's a big difference, and it translates itself into how people work. Their just ability to take risks, drive things, and that's where I come in, having to just mentor them and guide them and say, look, there is that at the end of the tunnel, and you should take risks.
Well, there are differences, and there are
resemblances, apart from the ones which are being taught at the entrepreneurship classes and all the things that we can list. I want to focus on one specific point. I think the one specific difference between Silicon Valley and Turkey, and in that sense, difference between any other country and the Silicon Valley and any other center, is the local culture. Apart from the rules and regulations specific to that specific country, there are unspoken cultural elements that one entrepreneur should be aware of doing business in that particular country. I think that is the main difference between among the countries, among the locations. One has to be aware of the way of doing business in that local culture in order to be successful, in order to businesses, in order to engage with the government, municipalities, and etc., in order to make forward in the business they are investing in or they're kickstarting. I think that's the main difference between venues, locations, and countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question for all three panelists, and I'll actually answer this one myself before passing it on. If you could describe if there was one or two watershed moments that inspired you to commit a large part of your career, which all of you have done, to mentorship and to the diaspora community, particularly in entrepreneurship. And I'll start with me. I was covering the President Obama's speech in Cairo in 2009 as a journalist for the BBC. When I decided I didn't want to be writing about these things, I wanted to be a part of it, and that's how I ended up working at the State Department, helping to create the Diaspora Engagement Program. And I was then working on that during the Arab Spring when I realized very little of what I had spent the past 4 years doing had ultimate impact on the ground, and that at the end of the day it was basic technology platforms that were changing realities in ways that I had never thought possible, and I wanted to be a part of that, and that's how I ended up here. And I'm sure there'll be another story in a couple of years, but that's my story, and I'd love to hear all of yours.
That's mentoring and being mentored. I think, in my experience, is how my entrepreneurship started. I never worked for a large company. Every company, except the one while I was in college working, were the companies I started, while I was in its early phases. But there was one gentleman who involved in the beginning of my first company. It's Super Online. It was the first biggest thing I started and built from scratch. He was very well known. He was the Turkish equivalent of Jack Welch. And when everybody tells you in this country or any other country that your idea is not worth a shit, and no, you can't do it, it doesn't work, this is Turkey, this is not America, the guy stood with me. And he actually told me, you can do it. And the day he thought that I could do it, he also invested in me. It was a year and a half mentorship before I saw his money and in business. But it was extremely important because I was a software programmer, and the next day I became a CEO in a startup. So I saw that was the beginning of it, and I found that type of environment even years later. I start companies now with more experience, no hair. I look for that beginning. There is never end that you could receive mentors. You can always be a mentee. And then I return it back. I love that. That's how most entrepreneurs get off the ground.
So in terms of, for me, what got me engaged with diaspora and mentorship, I'll have to go back a little bit back in time. But before I say that, I think we all acknowledge and diaspora is a huge asset for the United States and the country. And I think it might sometimes get lost in our daily runarounds and errands here, but we are a bridge and we have a huge responsibility on our shoulder. I think most everybody in this room has a heritage outside of this country. And I felt strongly about that frankly, after 9/11, I was in business school. I actually, the day September 11, 2000, I was at Wharton in my second year of recruiting, first year of recruiting. Everything was cancelled. We had, the world changed. The world literally changed, as we all know. And being in Philly and being there, and of Pakistani heritage, and what the experience was, instead of shrinking back, I felt strongly it's a moment for us to come together and see what we can do. So when I moved to the Valley after Wharton, to work for Siebel, who was, by the way, one of the top hirers out of Wharton Business School, because nobody else hired. Only Microsoft and Siebel were the main hirers. Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, all gone. This is how bad things were. I felt, we as Pakistan American community had a very strong base in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, but there was no platform. We either got together over nice dinner parties and had chicken tikka, or once in a while went to the mosque, but nothing in between. And that to me was unacceptable. And especially when you look at how many people have done well. And I, by the way, say this without feeling ashamed or feeling shy. I felt that some of our colleagues and my peers were selfish rather. Everybody's focused on their buck and their startups and their IPOs. And I held myself to that standard, and I asked everybody, you don't want to look back 20 years, 30 years from now and say, I was here, I was at this place, and things were falling apart around me. But I had this unique perspective of being born in a region that I was in the hot spot, and I'm doing nothing about it. You would feel really guilty. You got to get up and do something. So we got open going. We talked about the little bit of Pakistani entrepreneurs of North America. And at the time, it literally was, my kids used to come and volunteer. Today, we are one of the most viable entrepreneurship diaspora groups in the country, if not in the world, and entirely volunteer-driven. We don't have a single person on our payroll. And it's been tremendous to mentor, if you will provide a convening platform for the communities, and actually, regardless of their ethnic backgrounds. Even in my own case, I met Kareem at Open Conference, which led to my own career moving in a very different direction with Yonja Media. So for me, that was the beginning, and frankly also led to my engagement with the White House in the '08 campaign, but beyond, but also being appointed by the president. So, I think doors open for you in ways that you don't know, but there was an opening moment for me, and that was this feeling that we had to have a platform that was secular, that was fully focused on building value in the community and providing a platform, and without thinking through too much or overanalyzing, we just got going. And today, obviously, Open has done well, but beyond that, we have hopefully enabled a number of folks to do good and better things.
It's an interesting question or topic, because I've been serving in the board of many organizations, and I'm still. I'm an advisor in Endeavor and MIT Enterprise Forum, and I lecture in a couple of universities on innovation and entrepreneurship and etc., and a few more. Yet, after leaving Microsoft, I'm now been, and I'm also an angel investor as well. I've been doing that for a while. Now, after leaving Microsoft, now I'm looking for business opportunities myself as well. So I once again became a startup person. So I'm trying to extract information from what I've been advising actually, and what I should be learning and getting from my own positions, my own lectures, my own recommendations. So I'm trying to find a balance between now what I should be telling, saying, lecturing to the other entrepreneurs and youngsters and students versus what I should be doing now in my career at this point. So I had been doing that, and I've been trying to learn from my own experience, from my own teachings myself as well.
Excellent. Mustafa, I'd like to pose another question to you, directed at your earlier experience in the 90s with your first startup in the health and beauty space, which was a brick and mortar endeavor, and the last 20 years that you've spent working for a software company. how have your experiences differed, and what do you think of the new trend, which has been captured in many media publications, from Christopher Schroeder's book Startup Rising to the latest, I think last month's cover of Bloomberg Business, to The Economist, around the big trend in the Middle East, specifically around software entrepreneurship?
Sure. Well, it is not hard to say. The eras are completely different. When I first started my first venture, which was a health and beauty retail chain, with the ambition of turning it into a retail chain, back in back in the beginning of 90s, there was no internet, pretty much, no such thing at all, limited usage of computers, etc. So it was basically a very physical effort with the resources that I get from my parents. So it was a different world. It was a different effort. It was a different kind of startup, which I had learned from my parents, from friends, from others, etc. Now coming forward to the internet era, or 2000s or forward, it's a completely different world now. Starting up a business or entrepreneurship has become a way of making living, actually. If I'm not mistaken, a few months ago I read an article on New York Times. I think it was by Thomas Friedman. He was saying the new career path, advancing in your career, is building or making your own, starting your own business, rather than pursuing careers in big companies, multinationals, or local companies, what have you. Is thinking your own business and starting up is the new career advancement path for the students. Does it make sense? So rather than going to Microsoft or going after a job in Google or any other P&G or what have you, you have to start thinking the ideas you can build your own business. This is the new career advancement path for the students. So this is the world, this is the phenomenon we are living in. So I think with the use of technology and all the resources we have, funding, VCs, angel investors, the platform to start up a new business in this era is more resourceful, with a global perspective available than it was 20 years ago when I first started my brick and mortar business in Turkey with one store, distributing leaflets to get people into the store to sell shampoos and cosmetics and etc. So it has advanced in ways that that a young person would find it hard to understand at this time.
I want to shift the narrative a bit to interrogate this question of social impact and social entrepreneurship in the region. It's a question of much debate these days, and whether there is such a thing as social entrepreneurship in emerging markets, and whether any entrepreneurship has social impact in creating job growth, etc. So in your experience, in the Middle East in particular, where the highest YouTube videos, can anyone guess where the highest per capita usage of YouTube is? Shout it out. Anyone? Saudi Arabia. And within that per capita usage, does anyone know what type of person is watching the most videos? Women. And the type of video that they're watching is education. So there's quite an incredible opportunity for social impact in the Middle East, and that's being recognized, and there's certainly a lot of startups that are being targeted around that. But there's also a lot of debate about whether there is benefit in actually targeting your business around social impact. So I'd love to hear the perspective from all of you, some of which have focused on social impact and others that have created businesses that have inherently created social impact by creating jobs. What your thoughts are on this debate, Babur?
First of all, correction, probably men's watching videos for different kind of education too, but not necessarily.
Not on YouTube.
Robert, I'm not sure what you're watching.
That's it. That's about it. And I think I always saw the fundamental social. If there is socialness in any entrepreneurship, is fundamentally a job creation, and it's to be able to create jobs. And second, one thing that I always took. And did it because I learned it from my mentors is that not only you create jobs, but you also train your own people, your own potential leadership ranks that one day they can start their own companies. I think that's to me is the most fundamental of the social impact of an entrepreneur, of a group of entrepreneurs, is to create raw jobs that feeds families and then hope to build their companies, get bigger, and in the process train without training the next wave of entrepreneurship. So I always took a great pride when one of my key employees leave the company, start their own business. I hated them when they left to go to work for a big company or somebody else. But I take great pride when they leave, resign, go do their own. And eventually sometimes compete, but always back them up. So that's the way I see the socialness in my entrepreneurial activities, and I think that's the fundamental beginning point.
I like what you said. Nice perspective. From my experience, I could give you examples, but I'm going to focus on one thing that we've done within the business. And I think a lot of times the founders and the CEO bring their own personalities and their own vision, which has a social broader perspective into what happens in the business. So as we've been expanding our footprint in Turkey in the business, we were exploring the new set of products we could launch about a couple of years ago, and we decided to go in the job space, which is very, very different. For those of you who may have heard of Yonja, from what Yonja as an original social network is. And the reason, and I'll give you some facts about Turkey and social media, which you might find interesting. So just to step back, Turkey is a huge country for social. It's disproportionately engaged on social media, like on Facebook, and much to our chagrin in the earlier year, because that's what caused Yonja to have transition. Turkey is number 5 and number 6 on Facebook, 33 million users. Again, very significantly high engagement on Twitter and Pinterest and you name it. But I felt very, the more we look at this data, and also as a social company ourselves, the network, we realized that these kids who were spending time, and just within the Yonja network, up to an hour and a half per day, 1 to 1.5 hours per day, what they're doing primarily is profiles and communication. And you know what? They can paint whatever the vision folks want to paint here, but to me, I did not see that in any way economically value additive. In fact, given how young these folks were. And honestly, I felt if I'm perpetuating that, if Zynga claims that I've got the second highest user base in Turkey and look, I'm making all this money, good for Mark Pincus. But what is happening to these kids? And frankly, there's not much you could do after a while on poker in terms of taking your life forward. So we went into the job space, and what we felt was that Turkey had this fairly evolved online jobs market. You have job boards that came online when pretty much internet, when we launched Super Online. You had those, and then you had LinkedIn. So you either had these traditional job boards that had not embraced social or mobile, or you had LinkedIn, which is still seen as a premium, more of a high-end brand. But there's nothing in between. For folks who are, let's say, in southeastern Turkey, we are hearing today has quadrupled in terms of the unemployment rate in Turkey. If they're looking for a job, where do they go? For them, career.nets of the world have gone on. They're not the brand they identify with. However, LinkedIn is too elite for them. So we launched a product on Facebook, leveraging Facebook, where we aggregate all the job listings from all the job boards and add a social layer on it. We know every Turk who is on the internet is on Facebook. So we knew that they were there, but we wanted to make sure they also had now jobs content to be able to see and search and browse. And a lot of the thinking, that went into that business model and how we launched it, how we framed it, how we positioned it, how we branded it, called Iste Social, actually brought in the element that we wanted to serve the broader population. I was advised by a lot of folks, go after this crowd, they're most monetizable. I said, no, look, yes, you could potentially make a little bit more money with one side of the market, but I want to go with the bottom of the pyramid. It's a huge country. It's a country where a lot of young people, it still has very high unemployment. So we'll find out whether that's a good strategy or not. But at a conscious level, I felt gratified that today we are serving folks who are looking for their first teaching job, housewives who want to re-enter workforce and be a teacher in Adana, as well as an IT worker in Istanbul, and it's gratifying. And I cannot strip it away from my business strategy, but we went in this with a big social hat on, and so far it's been terrific. In fact, we're about to launch a partnership with a major brand, where we will spin off this company as a joint venture. So it has paid off so far. So that's one example I can share with you.
Doing well and doing good.
We'll see. But we're definitely trying to do well, inshallah.
So this is probably one of the most studied and discussed topics in the world: the use of technology on society, the impact of use of technology on society. So we can talk about this for hours, but as the topic is Turkey, let me give you a very specific example from Turkey. So I founded the group when I was at Microsoft, my previous employer, the group called Public-Private Alliances Team. The mission for this group was to actually entice and encourage governments to lead technology programs or to launch technology programs to empower, to tool the underserved communities with technology so that they can have access to internet technology, so that they have access to education, which would trigger education equality, job opportunities, economic growth, etc., etc. So this is the frame. So one of the, I have spent 3 years trying to convince Turkish government, ministers, or related responsible branches of the government to launch or to start a project around education, to provide the underserved communities in Turkey or the underserved students with technology so that they have equal access to technology and internet as they have done in Portugal, United Kingdom, Australia, etc. So, but finally, Turkish government decided to launch a program, a very aggressive, ambitious program. It is called Fatih Project. I don't know if you're familiar, heard of this project at all. It is pretty much the largest education initiative in the world. There are 16 million K-12 students in Turkey, in 50,000 schools, K-12 schools, with more than 500,000 classrooms, almost 600,000 teachers teaching in those schools and classrooms. And Turkish government decided to connect each and every classroom in the country with a fiber connection to the cloud and provide each and every student with a device, tablet device. Do you know, are you aware of the largest network in the world with the clients? Are you familiar? I'll tell you which one it is. It's the US Army, with almost 1.5 million clients connected to the same network. So this network will be 16 million clients, serving 16 million clients, students. So this tells you how ambitious this program is. And this is going to provide
a huge advantage for the country, to the students, to the youngsters, to the next generation of Turkey, with equal education opportunity, access to knowledge and cloud, with the content, with the infrastructure in place. This infrastructure will probably serve to the region, will not be limited only to the country, but will serve to the rest of the countries in the region as a knowledge information hub to consume all kinds of services and information. So in that respect, this is a good example of the social impact starting from education to job opportunities or job creation and economic growth, and also access to information, all kinds of information in Turkey, and also hopefully for the region as well.
Thank you. Well, before we open it up for questions from the audience, I would like to ask each of you to just give, if you could give one piece of advice to entrepreneurs in the Middle East and Turkey, very briefly, what would it be?
Go do it.
I won't be as brief, but I'll try to be brief. I'm going to cover something which I sort of use the opportunity to say this, which often we don't hear about. I think there's a huge opportunity for collaboration within the region in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I find it kind of frustrating that we are reinventing the wheel. These markets are big, huge, clearly, but they are somewhat discrete still. But no means the market size that we have in North America, right? So whether it's Jordan, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Saudi Arabia, you see a lot of initiatives going on that are well-meaning, resources that are being put on there. I don't see much collaboration on the entrepreneurship side across. We heard about some trade numbers, but those are high capex projects. And to make it very real, I'll give you an example. In my business, we obviously developers are a major resource we need in demand. Good developers, and Turkey is by no means inexpensive. It's pretty expensive to find a developer, a good developer, and talent is always an issue. But how come there are not many Pakistanis or Indians or others working in Turkey, which is 2 hours away, actually have synergies, have English language skills and so forth that could benefit Turkey, and vice versa. And the reason I sort of get this vantage point is because I spend time in other parts of in the region. I mentor folks in Pakistan, and I see no collaboration. You always see at the Prime Minister level nice big grand projects about metro buses running in Lahore. But what about also entrepreneurs exchanging resources, having shops across, launching products across, sharing talent? Everybody wants to come to the valley, whether to get resources or to raise funding or mentorship, but I don't see those bridges between Istanbul and Karachi and Cairo and Jeddah as much as they should be. And I spent a lot of my time doing that, and I felt maybe there's a reason why I went to. There are not many American Pakistanis running a Turkish company, and maybe I should leverage this opportunity to build the bridge, and I do that. But I would just recommend to entrepreneurs who's in the room, that if you are in the region, do think the region out as well. Don't just come think about the valley. There's a lot of resource there, and frankly, we have shared culture, shared history, and those things do help out when you're trying to build teams.
Well, that's a difficult question, actually. But in a very short way, I think entrepreneurs start doing what they want to do by following their gut feelings. I think that's the right approach. Just follow your gut feelings and do what you need to do. And along the way, you just learn how to do it, and you just do it.
Just do it. Great. Well, along those lines, we'd like to just do it and open it up for some questions from all of you. You could raise your hands. Yes, in the blue shirt. If you could stand up and introduce yourself.
My name is Dilawar. I work in the software, semiconductor industry company. So my question is for Babur Ozden. You point out three fundamental necessities for a successful startup ecosystem.
I didn't say success.
For a baseline startup ecosystem, let's change that way. So how do you evaluate Turkey's startup ecosystem with regards to ease of finding capital for startup companies?
Thank you. Has everyone heard the question? Okay, I was asked to evaluate the Turkish startup ecosystem, I guess compared to my experiences here in the United States.
Specifically with regards to ease of finding capital.
Ease of finding capital. Okay. Finding capital is not easy even in this part of the world. The media looks like it, portrays it, it sounds easy. And there are a lot of companies that get funded, but fundamentally you first need a compelling, it doesn't matter where you live. So if I compare the 9 years I built companies in Turkey between 1993 and 2001, and the last 10 years here in the US, if you don't have a compelling product that is really going to solve some significant consumer or business pain point, you are not fundable in anywhere. It doesn't matter what the source and who is funding it. So I think it's the quality of the compelling product is a function of the funds availability to you. So if you do this, doesn't matter where you do it, I think your chances to find capital sources is available to you. And there are regional differences. Some countries it's really hard to find this type of capital at an idea stage or at a prototype stage, but it is still doable. So one lesson I learned, and I try to pass this to anyone who cares to listen what I say, is that don't think of capital, don't think of the monies you may need, just focus on the creating a value, focus on your product. As a technology entrepreneur, of course, its minds will always involve software. So if you have a good product, money finds you. It's my experience.
Thank you. Actually, my question is similar to Kerem's question, but in a broad sense. So I would like to ask you to evaluate the state's funding. For example, the role of COSGAP, which is SME promotion agency in Turkey, and also the Ministry of Industry in giving incentive to the entrepreneurs in Turkey. So I would like to refer to World Bank data and ease of doing business. Among 185 countries, Georgia, which is a close neighbor to Turkey, is ranked 9, Singapore 1, USA 4, and Turkey ranks, unfortunately, 71. So how did these countries achieve, for example, Georgia achieve, and how could Turkey did not achieve so far? So what should do Turkey for the future?
If I may this, and I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to try to keep it not specific because I can't share this yet. But right now we're in the midst of forming a partnership with one of our brands, and I was sharing with some folks over here that we've spent 2 months literally just going over a draft set of proposals and agreements and NDAs and regulations, and nobody knows still whether or not this will be sufficient for review by the competition authority. You go to their website and it is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So any government officials in Turkey, and as a friend of Turkey, I can tell you, you need to really do some work on this stuff. It has actually come in the way of our doing business. We will still get through. I'm a believer in making things happen. We will make this happen against all the odds. But one thing I find fundamentally lacking in this process is at the government level, which is also you see in the private transaction, is the lack of trust. There's an absolute lack of trust, and it could be that there's been bad experiences, people have been burned, so the government has gone overboard into the regulating. But for example, asking entrepreneurs or partnering companies to produce documentation for their funds and the funds of funds and all that they invest to see what their span is, that is ridiculous. So we are funded by Tiger Global. Tiger Global is a major multi-billion-dollar fund of funds, and it's hedge fund. It's got too much going on. For me to be able to produce documentation that is subject to scrutiny by a bureaucrat in Turkey who has probably never started a company, I mean, that's overwhelming, to put it mildly. And I am sure there are so many examples that others can give. And it was eye-opening for me, even though I still believe Turkey is reformed in this area. Comparatively speaking to other countries in the region, it is way better to do business over there. I have enjoyed, but I feel that it is way behind, and it needs to really reduce friction, because otherwise it comes in the way of doing business. And I could totally see, if I wasn't passionate about making this happen, and if I wasn't clear-headed in my mind that this was the right partnership for us to do, I would have given up a long time ago, because the processes were opaque. In fact, not even defined. Every time you go and speak to somebody, they say, "Well, we haven't seen this before. Just give us everything." Right? But as I said, in my case, there's a lot of things. So this is at some level, I appreciate that. I think it's a journey, and clearly Turkey is going through this. But given its size, given the fact it's now the world's 70th biggest economy, $750 billion in GDP, it has to grow up on these regulatory matters. And so others may have an opinion on this, but I am more stating the problem than necessarily suggesting anything. But I just wanted to share with you that how it affects on a from a business standpoint when you see the role of government and sort of over-regulation, or rather ill-defined regulation.
I would just add, I took a very superficial look at the data here from the World Bank Doing Business Index, and it does look like, unfortunately, Turkey dropped in the ranks from 2012. But if you look a little bit at the actual micro data, so for example, getting credit and protecting investors, some of the particular indicators have actually rise within Turkey. So it's very possible that other countries just got better that made Turkey drop, but some of the internal indicators within Turkey actually got better from 2012 to 2013.
Yeah, and I'm going to add something on a positive note, which, by the way, you'll be very pleased to hear. Also, for example, I think last year, Turkish government defined the whole venture capital investing process, even regulated how angels can invest, gave cover to that. You compare that to the Jobs Act in the US. So that's very forward-looking. That's incredible. And literally, when I was speaking in Pakistan at an incubator, we were discussing how to take that model and share that with the Pakistani government. They can literally adopt it. So there are positives, absolutely. But it's very it's all over the place. In some areas, things are moving forward. In some areas, there's long ways to go.
Another question, Shadi?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shadi Al-Qadra. This question is actually for Deena. Great job moderating the panel, by the way. So through your work at Google, I know you handle a lot of strategic partnerships and work with entrepreneurs in developing countries. What are some similarities between, the Valley and entrepreneurs trying to start a business here and, entrepreneurs trying to start businesses in other countries? And what are, obviously the disadvantages and some of the challenges, the unique challenges that you've seen abroad? If you could just elaborate on that, that'd be great.
Sure. So that's a great question. I think fundamentally,